be with us soon.
Dear viewers, welcome back to the Vanished Lands, high in the heart of the Himalayas, where the air is thin and silence feels heavier than stone. There's a lake unlike any other on Earth. Its waters are shallow, its size unremarkable, but beneath its surface lies one of the most chilling mysteries of all time. Hundreds of skeletons rest there, their hollow eyes staring forever into the sky, preserved by ice as if the mountain itself refused to let them go. Who were they? Why did they die together in this desolate place? And why, even now, does the lake continue to reveal new secrets? Secrets that blur the line between myth, science, and something far more terrifying. This is the story of Roopkund, the Lake of Skeletons, a place where every bone is a question, every artifact a whisper, and every night the eternal watchers wait beneath the ice. High in the heart of the Indian Himalayas, where the mountains pierce the sky and the silence feels heavier than the air itself, lies a place untouched by time. Snow and stone rule here, and the winds sing their own endless hymn. This is a land where footsteps echo for centuries, and where nature guards its secrets with a grip stronger than steel. At an altitude where breath turns fragile and life trembles against the cold, a frozen lake lies hidden like a mirror of the heavens. That lake is Roopkund, and within its icy heart rests a secret so haunting, so unfathomable, that has baffled travelers, scientists, and storytellers alike. It is called the Lake of Skeletons. And this tale begins not with kings or armies, but with a shepherd. He was a man of the high meadows, weathered by the sun, hardened by the mountain winds. His eyes were keen, trained to spot a wandering goat from the farthest ridge, and his ears were accustomed to the whispers of avalanches in the distance. One summer, as the snows began to melt, he guided his flock higher than usual, chasing the greener grasses revealed by the retreating ice. The mountains were dangerous, yes, but they were also generous, and men like him had always risked their lives for the thin pastures hidden in these heights. That morning, he climbed a ridge overlooking the small glacial lake known in his village only by name. Roopkund. To him, it was simply a cold, lonely place where no one lingered. But the melting ice revealed something strange. At first, he thought he saw fallen logs, dark shapes trapped beneath the surface of the lake. But as the sun glared against the ice, he saw the truth. They were not logs. They were bones. The shepherd's heart pounded. He bent closer, brushing away the slush with a stick, and there, locked in crystal clear ice, was the face of a skull staring back at him. The sockets were hollow, yet they seemed alive, as though some ancient watcher was peering through the frozen wall of time. He staggered back, breath quickening, as his eyes adjusted to the impossible sight. The lake bed was littered with skeletons. Hundreds of them, bodies piled upon one another, their ribs twisted, their limbs bent unnaturally. Some lay face down in eternal sleep. Others seemed caught in the act of struggle, reaching upward with frozen arms as if begging the skies for mercy. The ice had preserved them so well that strands of hair clung to skulls, fragments of clothing fluttered in the cold wind, and leather shoes still embraced bones that had not walked the earth in 1,000 years. The shepherd fled. He did not stop to gather his goats. He ran down the slope for the terror that turned his legs to stone. By the time he stumbled into his village, words tumbled from his mouth in fragments. The lake, the bones, the faces staring from the ice. His tale spread like fire through the mountain valleys, and with every telling it grew darker. Some said he had seen the army of an ancient king who had vanished without a trace. Others whispered it was a cursed pilgrimage struck down by the wrath of the gods. The children listened wide-eyed by the fire. The elders shook their heads, muttering prayers into their hands. And the women warned that the lake was not to be approached, for the mountain had its reasons to keep its dead. The fear was not without weight. In these highlands, every stone, every peak, every shadow carried a legend, and the goddess Nanda Devi, whose shrine lay far above the clouds, was said to guard her sacred land with wrath as cold as the glaciers themselves. Few dared to doubt that such punishment could fall upon mortals who trespassed where they should not. Yet fear has a way of feeding curiosity. Soon, Groups of men braved the climb to see the lake for themselves. They returned pale and trembling, confirming the shepherd's words. There were indeed bones, so many bones, that the surface of the lake itself seemed like a graveyard unveiled by the melting snow. Skulls lay scattered along the shore, their teeth still clenched as if biting into eternity. Entire skeletons were tangled in one another, frozen mid-movement as though death had come suddenly, with no chant for burial, no prayer, no last rites. But who were these people? That question burned like fire in the minds of the villagers. They argued late into the night, each voice competing to make sense of the impossible. One said they were invaders, perhaps Tibetan soldiers who had lost their way. Another insisted they were pilgrims, punished for daring to cross the goddess's forbidden path. And one elder whispered of something more sinister, that the mountain itself had devoured them, keeping their bodies as a warning. The truth, however, was far from simple. Years passed, and the lake remained a mystery whispered in hushed tones. The world beyond the villages began to take notice. Explorers, historians, and scientists climbed the treacherous slopes, hoping to claim the secret of the skeleton lake. Some returned with sketches, others with bones, but none with answers. Imagine the scene for a moment. High above the world, where the wind never rests, you stand on the edge of a lake surrounded by hundreds of skeletons. You touch the skull of the man who walked these mountains perhaps 1,000 years ago. His clothes, tattered but still visible, speak of an age gone by. His hair, still attached to bone, sways in the cold wind. Around him, dozens more, men, women, perhaps even children, lie together silent, eternal. It is not just a grave. It is a frozen battlefield, a halted procession, a single moment of catastrophe captured forever. The villagers grew more fearful. Some refused to graze their animals anywhere near Roopkund. They believed the spirits of the dead wandered restlessly, searching for peace that would never come. Travelers who dared to sleep near the lake spoke of strange dreams, faces staring through the ice, voices murmuring in forgotten tongues, the sound of footsteps circling their tents though no one was there. A few even claimed to see figures rising from the snow, walking slowly around the lake's edge before dissolving into mist. The shepherd who first saw the bones aged quickly. He avoided the subject in his final years, refusing to speak of what his eyes had witnessed. He would sit silently by the fire, his gaze lost in the distance, as though a piece of him had remained at that lake, trapped among the skeletons beneath the ice. But the mystery only deepened. When researchers examined the remains, they discovered something unsettling. These were not the bones of soldiers. Many skeletons were women. Some were older, some younger. They were not dressed like warriors, but like travelers, people on a journey. And most striking of all, the marks on their skulls suggested violent blows, but not from swords or spears. The fractures were round, as if caused by heavy stones falling from the sky. This detail reignited the legends of the goddess's wrath. Was this the punishment of Nanda Devi, casting hail the size of fists upon trespassers who dared to cross her sacred land? The villagers nodded knowingly. Science and myth seemed to touch hands, if only for a fleeting moment. Yet even as explanations surfaced, the mystery grew deeper. Not all the skeletons belonged to one time. Some were separated by centuries. The lake was not the scene of one tragedy, but many, across the ages. Different groups had met the same fate in the same cursed place. And each time, the mountain had swallowed them into its cold embrace, preserving them for all eternity. By now, the Lake of Skeletons had become more than a local legend. It was a puzzle that called out to the world. Scientists sought to carbon date the bones, to map their origins, to understand why so many lives ended here. But for every answer, more questions arose. Some skeletons belonged to people from distant lands, their features unlike those of the villagers. What drew them to this isolated lake? Trade? Pilgrimage? Or something darker? Perhaps a cult seeking communion with the gods of the mountain? The villagers, however, needed no scientific explanation. To them, the lake was cursed. The dead were not meant to be disturbed, and every bone taken from Roopkund was another spirit denied peace. Some said storms struck harder in the years when outsiders carried bones down the slopes, as if the goddess herself demanded their return. The shepherd's tale had become legend, But the lake itself remained a haunting truth. Those who came to see it never left unchanged. Some found themselves awed by the fragility of life, standing face to face with the dead of centuries past. Others were gripped by fear, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes staring at them from beneath the ice. And a few, just a few, felt something else, a strange pull, as though the mountain whispered their name, inviting them to stay forever. And so the lake waits. Each summer, as the ice melts, more skeletons emerge from its depths. Each skull gleams under the sun, as if rising from sleep to remind the world that their story is not finished. The shepherd who first stumbled upon the secret is long gone, but the memory of his discovery has grown into something far greater. A mystery that blurs the lines between history, legend, and nightmare. And just as the sun sets behind the jagged peaks, painting the sky in fire and blood, the last rays of light strike the surface of Roopkund. The ice glimmers, and beneath its fragile skin, more skulls shimmer in a fading glow, silent, waiting, as if the mountain has yet to reveal all it hides. The frozen secret is only the beginning. Legends are not born in silence. They are born in the echo of fear, in the hush that falls over a firelit gathering, when someone begins to tell things best left forgotten. After the shepherd stumbled upon skeletons at Roopkund, his discovery spread through the villages like smoke on the wind. But what spread faster was not the fact of the bones. It was the whisper of what those bones meant. And in those whispers, fear began to take shape. Some claimed the skeletons were the remains of an army long lost, warriors who had once marched across the Himalayas with iron in their hands and conquest in their hearts. Others insisted they were pilgrims who had offended the goddess Nanda Devi. Punished in a single night of fury, their lives crushed as easily as frost beneath stone. And still others said they were cursed wanderers, souls who had strayed too far from the human world, drawn into the mountain's heart by forces beyond comprehension. The lake was no longer just a place. It had become a story. And in these mountains, stories carry power. The villagers told each other that the dead of Roopkund did not rest easily. At night, when the winds were high and the stars sharpened above the peaks, faint voices could be heard. Some described them as songs, a mournful chorus that rose from the lake itself, echoing against the slopes. Others swore they heard cries, the kind that make a man's blood run cold, like travelers calling for help from beyond death. It was said that if you camped too close to the lake, you would dream of faces staring through the ice, eyes hollow yet filled with longing. The dreams felt so real that some awoke screaming, clawing at their blankets as though trying to escape unseen hands pulling them downward. There were whispers of travelers vanishing without trace, their tents left behind, their footprints leading toward the lake's edge and then stopping abruptly, as though they had walked willingly into the frozen water. The more the lake revealed itself, the more the mountains around it seemed to change. Shepherds spoke of sudden storms that came without warning, as if the skies themselves sought to drive men away. Hikers told of seeing strange lights, flickering orbs that floated over the ice, vanishing when approached. Old women in the villages muttered that these were not lights at all, but restless spirits, wandering in search of warmth they would never again find. But one story lingered above all. It was the story of the goddess's wrath. Long ago, so the elders told, pilgrims once climbed into the sacred highlands to worship at the shrine of Nanda Devi. But their journey was not pure. They carried with them forbidden dancers, outsiders not blessed for the pilgrimage. Their songs and laughter echoed across the slopes, and their presence was seen as an insult to the goddess of the mountains. In her fury, she cast down a storm of stones from the heavens, shattering skulls, breaking spines, and leaving the earth littered with the dead. And to ensure the world never forgot, she preserved their remains in ice, locking their souls within the lake for all eternity. The story spread beyond the villages. Travelers from distant lands came, curious to see this frozen graveyard. Scholars and adventurers carried with them their own interpretations, weaving the tale into larger myths of lost kingdoms and vanished armies. Some compare it to the fate of soldiers swallowed by deserts or seas, entire legions erased by the cruelty of nature. Others spoke of darker forces, that the skeletons were sacrifices, offerings to an ancient power hidden beneath the mountain. But every new visitor carried away not only bones and notes, but also new whispers. They spoke of the air around Roopkund being heavier than anywhere else, as if the mountain itself was aware of intruders. They described hearing low murmurs at night, voices too distant to be understood, yet too close to be ignored. Some said these voices called their names. There was a story of a merchant who traveled with a caravan near Roopkund. He was known as a practical man, sharp with his trade, not one to believe in legends. Yet when he camped on the slopes one night, he awoke to find his companions gone. Their belongings were untouched, their animals tethered, but their footprints led only toward the lake. The merchant swore he heard singing, low, rhythmic chanting that seemed to seep into his bones. He followed the sound until he too reached the lake's edge, where the moonlight revealed dozens of skulls staring at him from beneath the surface. Terrified, he fled, but his companions were never seen again. Another tale came from a group of young men from a distant city who ventured to the lake in the early years of exploration. They carried with them firewood, food, and laughter, mocking the villagers who warned them to keep their distance. They claimed the skeletons were nothing but history, mere artifacts waiting to be studied. But on their second night, one of them awoke to find a figure sitting on the ice, a woman draped in white, her hair long and black, her face hidden. She seemed to hum a melody, a tune so haunting that it froze him where he lay. When he dared to blink, she was gone. In the morning, he found the footprints of his companions leading toward the lake. Their bodies were never recovered. For every story, there was someone who swore was true. And even skeptics, those who laugh at curses and ghosts, admitted uneasily that something about Roopkund did not feel right. The silence there was different. It was not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of watching. Imagine it. You sit at the lake's edge, the night wind cold against your skin, the stars scattered above you. You lean closer, and through the ice, you see the hollow sockets of skulls gazing back. The wind whistles across the ridges, and in its howl you think you hear words, broken syllables in a language you do not know. Perhaps it is only the wind, perhaps not, but in that moment, you feel small, smaller than you have ever felt before, caught between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The villagers believed the dead wanted something. Some said they sought release, begging for prayers that could free their souls. Others feared they were jealous, craving the warmth of the living, reaching out to pull new souls into their frozen company. Pilgrims who passed near Roopkund sometimes left offerings at the lake's edge, coins, food, even cloth, hoping to appease whatever haunted the waters. But the whispers never ceased. In time, the lake became known as a place of testing, where even the bravest men felt their courage dissolve. Soldiers who climbed the ridges admitted to feeling watched, as though hundreds of unseen eyes followed their every step. Monks who meditated there claimed they heard voices chanting from beneath the ice, words that did not belong to any human tongue. One monk described it as a hymn that rose and fell like the rhythm of breathing, as if the mountain itself was alive, whispering through the dead. And then came the story that sealed Roopkund's reputation. A traveler, hardened and strong, came to the lake one summer. He was no shepherd, no pilgrim, no scientist. He was a wanderer, driven by something even he could not name. He set his camp close to the water, ignoring the warnings of the villagers. For 2 nights, he heard nothing but the usual winds. But on the 3rd night, as the moon rose high, he awoke with a start. At first, he thought he had been dreaming, but then he heard it clearly, chanting, faint, distant, yet unmistakable. He sat up, his body rigid, straining to listen. The sound came from across the frozen lake, rising and falling a rhythm that did not belong to the wind. It was a chorus of voices, layered and haunting, as though hundreds of throats sang in unison. The words were unfamiliar, but the feeling was unmistakable. It was a song of mourning, a lament for lives lost and trapped forever. His heart pounded as he crawled to the lake's edge. The moonlight shimmered on the ice, revealing the glimmer of bones beneath. The voices grew louder, circling him, echoing across the mountains. He felt them inside his chest, vibrating in his very breath. And then, from the corner of his eye, he thought he saw movement. Shadows rising from the ice, figures walking slowly around the lake, their forms wavering like mist. He clutched his blanket, frozen in terror. The chanting swelled, surrounding him like a tide. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. Silence fell heavy once more. The traveler would survive the night, but he would never again speak of what he saw. His story reached the villages through others, whispered with dread. The mountain, it seemed, had given him a glimpse into its secret and warned him never to return. And so the legend of Roopkund deepened. The lake was no longer just a graveyard. It was a place of voices, a place where the dead spoke, where the mountain itself whispered through the bones. But the mountain was not finished. For as long as the ice continued to melt, new secrets would rise, and what waited beneath the surface would prove more haunting than the whispers that drifted through the night. The frozen secret was only the beginning. The whispers from the mountains had only just begun. In the high reaches of the Himalayas, where the air grows thin and the peaks claw at the heavens, there is a goddess who is both worshipped and feared. Her name is Nanda Devi, the daughter of the mountains, the guardian of valleys and glaciers, the one whose beauty and wrath have been carved into song and story for centuries. To the people of Uttarakhand, she is not just a deity, but the very embodiment of the mountains themselves. To anger her is to awaken the fury of the Himalayas. Every shrine raised in her honor trembles with reverence. Every pilgrimage made in her name is walked with humility. For the people who live under her gaze, there is no doubt. The goddess watches and she punishes those who stray. And so, when word spread of hundreds of skeletons lying frozen in the waters of Roopkund Lake, many villagers did not see a mystery to be solved. They saw a judgment already delivered. They whispered that those who perished had been struck down by Nanda Devi herself. The lake was her warning, carved not in words, but in bones. The tale most often told around firelit nights was one of pilgrims who had defied the sacred rules of her land. Long ago, so the elders said, a group of worshippers set out to honor Nanda Devi, climbing the steep trails toward her shrine. But in their arrogance, they broke the code of purity. They brought outsiders into the pilgrimage, dancers and entertainers whose presence was forbidden on such holy ground. The songs of laughter and music echoed to the mountains where only prayer was meant to be heard. The goddess, in her fury, unleashed her punishment. It was said that a storm unlike any other descended upon the travelers. Not rain, not snow, but iron. Stones fell from the heavens, each one large enough to shatter a man's skull, each strike accompanied by the roar of the goddess's voice. In moments, the procession was destroyed, their blood soaking into the snow, their bodies left where they fell. And Nanda Devi, to ensure the world never forgot, preserved their remains in the ice. Roopkund became her eternal altar, and the skeletons her silent testimony. The story was sung in ballads, the kind of haunting folk songs that drifted from village to village. Old women sang them in voices cracked with age, their words carrying both reverence and warning. The lyrics told of the goddess's dance of fury, of mortals who mocked her, of the reign of death that silenced their songs. Children grew up learning the tale as if it were as true as the rising of the sun. And when travelers asked about the lake, the villagers always answered the same. It was cursed. But myths have a way of becoming tangled with truth. And in time, questions began to rise. Could the skeletons at Roopkund truly be the victims of a divine storm? Or was there something more earthly, more terrible at work? Something that later generations clothed in the language of gods and curses? The first outsiders who examined the bones dismissed the legends as superstition. To them, the goddess's wrath was merely a poetic explanation for what was, in their eyes, a historical tragedy. But the deeper they looked, the more uneasy they became. For the skeletons themselves seemed to echo the old ballads. Researchers noted strange marks on skulls. They were not sword cuts, nor the sharp edges of weapons. They were round, deep fractures, as though something had struck from above with immense force. Many skulls bore these dents, always on the crown of the head. The rest of the body showed little damage, as though death had come in a single brutal blow. It was an unsettling detail, one that mirrored the legend too closely to ignore. Could the ballad of a rain of stones have been more than a metaphor? Could the story of the goddess's wrath be rooted in something real? A catastrophe that fell from the skies? The people of the mountains nodded knowingly. To them, science had only confirmed what their ancestors already knew. The goddess had struck these people down, and the lake was proof of her power. Outsiders could measure and theorize, But the truth was already written in the faith of the land. But were the pilgrims themselves? Who were they? The skeletons were not all alike. Some were men, strong and tall, perhaps protectors of the group. Others were women, their fragile bones preserved in the cold. A few were younger, suggesting children had walked the same path. They carried belongings, wooden staffs, jewelry, fragments of cloth, that told of a journey, perhaps one of devotion. Their story was not that of an army marching to conquest. It was that of travelers moving together, bound by purpose. And then there were the ballads, passed down through generations, sung by voices that had never seen the lake, yet echoed its reality. Could it be that these songs were more than legend, that they were memory, oral history of an ancient tragedy, preserved in rhythm and rhyme, waiting for the world to rediscover? Imagine the scene, a procession of pilgrims climbing higher into the thin air, their footsteps crunching on snow, their songs carried by the wind. They believe they are blessed, that their devotion will shield them. But the sky darkens, the clouds gather, and from above comes a storm of ice. Not ordinary hail, but stones of ice so massive they crush bones, striking with violence that leaves no escape. Panic erupts, screams echo, and within moments, the procession lies broken across the slope. The snow drinks their blood, the mountain claims their breath, and the goddess's silence falls once more. Centuries later, the ice melts, and their remains resurface, as if the mountain had chosen to remind the living of what it guards. The villagers feared this reminder. They told their children to never laugh too loudly near the sacred paths, to never speak of the lake lightly, to never doubt the goddess's fury. And travelers who ignored the warnings often returned shaken. They spoke of dreams where a woman clothed in white appeared, her eyes as cold as the glaciers, her voice a whisper carried by the wind. Do not disturb my resting place. The connection between faith and fact grew stronger when the dents in the skulls were revealed. To modern researchers, the explanation leaned toward nature. They spoke of a rare hailstorm, with ice as hard and heavy as stones, falling with the force of the skies. To the villagers, this was not nature. It was Nanda Devi herself, wielding the storm as her weapon. Two languages, two explanations, one truth that cannot be denied. The dead of Roopkund had been struck down by something that came from above. And yet, the mystery did not end there. For the skeletons were not from a single time. Studies revealed that groups separated by centuries lay together in the same lake. This was not one tragedy, but many. Pilgrims across the ages had climbed into the goddess's domain, and across the ages, they had met the same fate. It was as if the mountain waited, patient and eternal, for those who would forget the old warnings. And each time it reminded them. The ballads became more haunting in light of these discoveries. Were they prophecies as well as memories? Did the songs carry a warning not only for the past, but for the future? If so, then Roopkund was not just a place of death. It was a cycle, a repeating story written by the hand of the mountain itself. Travelers who heard the ballads often carried them back to their lands, weaving them into new stories. Some spoke of the goddess as a figure of beauty, with eyes like the sky and hair like the night, who danced upon the slopes with fury when dishonor touched her shrine. Others painted her as a shadow, a looming force that struck down the arrogant with no mercy. But always, the theme was the same: trespass, punishment, death. The researchers who studied the skulls admitted uneasily that the legends and the science aligned too well. The dents were real. The story of stones falling from the sky matched the evidence. Yet for all their measurements, they cannot fully explain the atmosphere of the lake. The heaviness in the air, the whispers at night, the dreams that plagued those who camped nearby. There was something beyond science here, something that refused to be measured. And so the curse of Nanda Devi remained, half myth, half truth, woven tightly together. The villagers still warned travelers not to approach lightly. The pilgrims who passed nearby still left offerings. And the lake itself, surrounded by silent peaks, still shimmered with the bones of those who had dared to climb too high, to laugh too loud, to forget the goddess's gaze. But perhaps the most haunting proof came not from legend or song, but from the bones themselves. For when researchers examined them closely, they found the dense, deep, round marks in skulls, exactly where the old ballads said the stones had fallen. Science had confirmed what story had carried all along, that the sky had rained death. And so, the question grew louder. Were the songs of Nanda Devi merely stories? Or were they the voice of memory, warning across centuries? And if the goddess had once struck down mortals who defied her, what might she do again if the lake was disturbed too far? As the sun dipped behind the mountains and the shadows grew long, the skeletons at Roopkund seemed to glow faintly beneath the ice. Their skulls, cracked and dented, told the same story the songs had always sung. A story of wrath from above, a story of punishment eternal, a story that was not yet finished. And just as the researchers noted the strange dents in the skulls, a chill swept across the camp, for they realized that the mountain had preserved not just bones, but the very moment when the sky had fallen. And perhaps, just perhaps, it would fall again. The lake of skeletons had already confounded the world with its secrets. Hundreds of bodies frozen in ice, skulls shattered as though the sky itself had fallen upon them, legends of curses and divine fury echoing in every village song. But the mountain was not finished with its revelations. For just when the story of Roopkund seemed to align with ancient ballads and the wrath of Nanda Devi, science uncovered something so bewildering that it turned the entire mystery inside out. The bones, it seemed, were not all the same. For years, researchers believed that the skeletons at Roopkund belonged to a single tragic group. Perhaps pilgrims, perhaps soldiers, perhaps wanderers. But as science grew sharper, so did the story. When genetic testing was done on the remains, the results revealed something extraordinary. Some of the skeletons did not belong to the people of these mountains. They did not even belong to India. Their origins lay far, far away. The news fell like a thunderclap. Foreign bones? How could that be? In the frozen silence of the Himalayas, thousands of miles from any sea, any desert trade route, or any empire's marching ground. How had strangers from distant lands come to rest at the edge of a glacial lake? And why did they die alongside locals, their bones mingled together beneath the same ice? The questions multiplied. Were these invaders, men who had crossed vast lands in search of conquest, only to be swallowed by the mountains? Or were they explorers, lost in their ambition, their journey ending in a frozen graveyard they never meant to find? Or perhaps, more chilling still, were they seekers of something forbidden, drawn by knowledge or treasures whispered only in shadows? The DNA evidence was clear. Some skeletons carried the genetic markers of people who could not have been native to this region. Their ancestry traced the lands as distant as the Mediterranean. Strangers who should never have walked the Himalayan slopes were lying side by side with locals in the icy waters of Roopkund. This revelation turned the mystery into something deeper, almost unfathomable. For centuries, villagers had spoken of curses and divine wrath. And now, here was proof that not all the dead were their own. The lake had claimed not only the faithful pilgrims of Nanda Devi, but foreigners who had crossed unimaginable distances. But what had drawn them here, to one of the most isolated places on Earth? Imagine the scene. Centuries ago, before the age of maps and machines, before the world had been carved neatly into nations, a group of strangers arrived in the shadow of the Himalayas. Their clothes were unfamiliar, their speech strange to the ears of the mountain people. They carried objects not seen in these valleys before, metals, beads, tools shaped in ways that seemed foreign. Their skin, their features, their very presence marked them as outsiders. And yet, somehow, they walked the same treacherous paths as local pilgrims, climbed the same sacred ridges, and reached the same lake that even the villagers feared. But why? Some scholars suggest trade. Perhaps these foreigners were merchants, drawn by rumors of rare herbs, stones, or treasures hidden in the Himalayas. Yet, the lake lies far above any sensible trade route, perched like a secret in the clouds. Others propose exploration, daring wanderers who sought to map the edges of the known world. But who would bring women and children on such a perilous path? And then, there's the darker theory, that these foreigners came not by accident, but by design, that they sought something sacred, something forbidden, that lay near the Lake of Bones. Perhaps they had heard whispers of the goddess herself, or of a hidden shrine older than memory, a place where heaven and earth touched. If so, their journey was not one of trade or conquest, but of hunger, for knowledge, for power, for communion with forces they did not understand. The ballads of the villagers did not speak of foreigners, but their silence does not erase the possibility. If the goddess punished trespassers, would she not punish them all, local and stranger alike? In the stories, Nanda Devi's wrath did not discriminate. The storm fell on every head beneath the sky. Yet the most haunting detail was not just that these groups were different, but that they were separated by centuries. The DNA revealed not one tragedy, but many. The skeletons did not all die at once. They came at different times, across generations, and yet they all met the same fate, their bodies preserved in the same icy grave. This revelation shook every theory. The lake was not the site of a single cursed event. It was a place of repeated death. Time and again, across the centuries, groups had climbed into the mountains and perished in the same way. The foreigners and the locals alike had been drawn there, and the mountain had claimed them all. What kind of place is this? That calls to people across time and distance. The villagers believe the answer is simple. Roopkund is cursed. It is a domain of the goddess, and those who enter without reverence will not leave. To them, it did not matter if the bones were Indian or foreign, pilgrim or wanderer. All who disrespected the sacred land would meet the same fate. The presence of foreigners only deepened their fear. Proof that even strangers from distant lands were not spared. But to others, the presence of foreign bones hinted at something far stranger. What if Roopkund was more than a lake? What if it was a place of convergence? A hidden point on the earth where paths unseen drew travelers like moths to a flame. Across the centuries, different groups may have felt the same pull, walking willingly into the mountain's embrace. Some even whisper of an ancient cult, one that spanned lands and ages, its followers drawn to Roopkund for secret rites. Perhaps the lake was never meant to be a grave, but an altar, a place where offerings were made not to the goddess alone, but to something older, something buried beneath the mountain itself. The villagers tell of strange lights over the lake, of voices in the night, of dreams that turn men into wanderers. Could these be the same whispers that led foreigners to climb where they did not belong? Could Roopkund itself be calling, weaving its mystery across the centuries, luring the faithful and the curious alike? And so the story deepens. Beneath the ice lies not one tragedy, but many. Not one people, but many. Roopkund is not a single tale. It is a library of the dead, each skeleton a chapter, each skull a verse in a poem the mountain has been writing for 1,000 years. But what unsettles most is not just the diversity of the dead, but the unity of their fate. Whether pilgrim or stranger, whether Indian or foreign, whether centuries apart or standing side by side, all lie in the same frozen grave. Their bones are mingled, indistinguishable, as if death itself chose to erase the borders between them. And in that mingling lies the greatest mystery of all. When the researchers first revealed the DNA results, the world marveled. Journalists wrote of the Mediterranean and the Himalayas, of foreigners in a lake of skeletons. But for the villagers, the revelation was no surprise. They nodded grimly and said, "The goddess punishes all." The mountain does not care for the origin of bones. It only cares for silence, for reverence, for respect. Those who forget, whether stranger or son, are swallowed into the ice. Yet one question lingers. How could groups separated by centuries die in the same place, in the same way? What force of nature, what hand of fate, what will of gods could repeat itself with such terrifying precision? Was it merely coincidence? Or was the curse of Roopkund written into the mountain itself, waiting patiently for new victims across the ages? The researchers, staring at the cracked skulls beneath their microscopes, could not answer. They saw the dents, the fractures, the silence of bones that had once been alive. They traced the DNA, built timelines, mapped migrations, and then they paused. For the evidence spoke louder than any legend. It revealed what the ballad had always suggested, but science had never dared admit. The dead of Roopkund were not one story. They were many. And so, the lake of skeletons remains. Its water still, its ice unbroken. Beneath it lie pilgrims and foreigners, men and women, young and old, separated by centuries yet united in death. Their bones whisper of journeys unfinished, of mysteries unsolved, of truths too vast for the living to comprehend. And as the sun sets behind the jagged peaks, the ice gleams once more. The skulls shimmer faintly beneath the surface, their hollow eyes watching, waiting. They do not speak, yet their silence is louder than words. For within that silence lies a question that no one has yet answered. Why here? Why them? Why across centuries, across worlds, do the dead of Roopkund come together? And then, just when the researchers thought they had uncovered the final truth, the DNA revealed its last secret. These bones belong not only to different peoples, but to different centuries. The dead of Roopkund had not died together. They had died apart. But in the end, the mountain gathered them all, preserving them in a single frozen graveyard, a tapestry of death woven across ages. The lake had become more than a mystery. It had become a warning. And with that revelation, the mountain's silence deepens. For if Roopkund is claimed to living across centuries past, who is to say it will not claim again? The Lake of Skeletons has always been a graveyard of questions. Bones stare silently through the ice, skulls fractured as though the heavens themselves had struck them, and the winds that coil around the ridges carry whispers no man can explain. Yet when the first explorers came, they discovered something even more haunting than the remains of the dead. For the mountain had not only preserved bodies, it had preserved their lives. The ice, cold and unyielding, had guarded their belongings. Scattered among the bones, embedded in the frozen mud, were objects, silent witnesses to a tragedy long past. Wooden spears, still sharp though centuries old. Fragments of jewelry that glimmered faintly in the mountain sun. Leather shoes, their stitching almost intact. Rings, beads, knives, and cloth faded but still clinging stubbornly to form. These objects were not relics lying in museums, not imitations carved for tourists, but the very things these people had carried with them on the day they died. Their last possessions, their only companions into the eternal frost. And it is here in these objects that the story deepens. Imagine standing at the lake's edge. The air is thin, your breath ragged. You kneel by the skeleton of a woman, her bones sprawled as though she had fallen mid-step. By her side lies a wooden staff, its surface smooth by the grip of her hand. On her finger is a ring, its metal dull with age, but unmistakably human, unmistakably personal. You pick it up, and in that moment, she is no longer just bones. She was someone who laughed, who wept, who walked with companions, who carried this ring for reasons known only to her heart. Each artifact whispered of lives cut short. A necklace worn perhaps for beauty, perhaps for devotion. A shoe, worn thin on the sole, proof of miles walked before fate intervened. A spear, its blade chipped, hinting at hunts or battles. And yet, some of these items carried a strangeness, a detail that disturbed the scholars who studied them. For while the skeletons themselves belonged to centuries past, the belongings seemed wrong, too refined, too modern in design. The stitching on the shoes bore patterns resembling those used thousands of years later. The jewelry carried motifs that matched cultures far away, even across oceans. The spears bore balance and craftsmanship beyond what the villagers believed existed in those times. How could this be? The locals shook their heads and muttered that these belongings were cursed, that the mountain warped them, making them appear strange to unworthy eyes. But the scholars, holding these objects in their hands, felt something deeper. The past was not aligning with the present. Time itself seemed to twist in Roopkund, refusing to obey the neat divisions of history. Some items were even more baffling. A small pendant carved from bone carried markings no one recognized. At first glance, they seemed like simple scratches, the idle work of craftsmen. But when examined carefully, they resembled symbols, patterns repeating with purpose, like a message written in a language long forgotten. And when aligned against the night sky, one scholar claimed they matched constellations. Yet these constellations did not match the heavens as we know them today. They were stars arranged in patterns that belonged to a different age. The sky as it once was centuries or perhaps millennia ago. This discovery sent a shiver through those who studied it. How could people so ancient have mapped stars that no longer shine in those positions? Was this knowledge passed down from ancestors even older? Or did these travelers carry wisdom from lands far beyond the imagination of the villagers? The belongings raised questions as troubling as the bones themselves. Who wore these ornaments? Why did they feel so foreign, so advanced? Could these people belong to a culture long erased from memory, a civilization that walked the same earth but left behind only whispers hidden in ice? Consider the leather shoes. They were not crude wrappings of hide, but carefully constructed, stitched with patterns that modern cobblers recognized. They seemed almost contemporary. Could time have truly preserved them so perfectly? Or was there another force at work in these mountains, one that defied the natural decay of things? The villagers believed it was a goddess, keeping the dead exactly as they had fallen, ensuring their story would never fade. The scholars, however, could not shake the feeling that the belongings hinted at something more, a knowledge that should not have been possible, artifacts that should not exist where they were found. And so, Roopkund became not only a graveyard, but a museum of contradictions. Each object was a clue, and each clue only deepened the enigma. Wooden spears spoke of survival. Jewelry spoke of devotion. Shoes spoke of journeys long and arduous. And yet, the symbol spoke of something else, an awareness of the heavens, of time, of worlds beyond what these people should have known. There were darker interpretations, too. Some whispered that these belongings were not carried by accident, that the travelers had come with purpose, with offerings, perhaps for a ritual. The spears were not weapons, but ceremonial tools. The jewelry not adornments, but charms, tokens of devotion of forces unseen. The rings and pendants not for beauty, but for bargaining, with gods, with spirits, with whatever lurked beneath the ice. If so, then Roopkund was not just the scene of a tragedy. It was the stage of a ritual gone wrong. One villager told a legend passed quietly through generations. That long ago, groups of outsiders came into the mountains not to worship the goddess, but to seek her power. They carried with them objects infused with meaning, hoping to trade devotion for strength or knowledge or life beyond death. But the goddess saw their arrogance, and she destroyed them, scattering their bones across the lake. Their belongings remained not as treasures, but as warnings. When these stories reached the scholars, some dismissed them as superstition, but others wondered, was it possible that Roopkund was a place of pilgrimage not only for locals, but for strangers across the ages? That people came not just to worship, but to bargain with forces they did not understand? The objects certainly seemed to hint at intention. They were not the possessions of a fleeing army. They were carried with care, chosen for significance. A ring carried to the end of the world. A pendant carved with stars. Shoes that had walked farther than anyone thought possible. And then came the discovery that changed everything. Among the belongings, a scholar uncovered a small artifact, worn and fragile, carved with strange symbols. At first, it seemed like nothing more than decoration. But as he traced the markings, he realized they formed a pattern, a map of the sky. Yet, when compared to the stars above, the pattern did not align. It matched constellations not seen in today's heavens, as though it captured sky that belonged to another age, another alignment of the cosmos. What did it mean? Some said it was proof that these travelers carried knowledge lost to history, a memory of the heavens as they once were. Others whispered something more chilling, that the artifact mapped not the sky above us, but the sky of another world entirely. The scholar who made this discovery was unsettled. He stared long into the night, comparing the artifact against star charts, tracing the unfamiliar constellations, and as the wind howled across the peaks, he realized the truth was far stranger than he could explain. For the artifact was not only a possession, it was a message, a fragment of something larger, a key to a mystery the mountain had guarded for centuries. And as he looked up at the cold stars glittering above Roopkund, he felt the weight of a question that chilled him to his core. Were these belongings remnants of pilgrims and wanderers? Or were they offerings, left deliberately, meant for something that still waits beneath the ice? The silent witnesses had spoken, and their voices were more unsettling than the bones themselves. High in the Himalayas, where the ridges cut against the sky like the teeth of ancient gods, maps whisper secrets as much as they reveal them. Most maps are practical, marking rivers, valleys, and safe passes. But some maps, the older ones, those drawn by trembling hands and passed in secrecy, speak of something else. They mention paths that no one today dares to mark, trails known not for trade or pilgrimage, but for silence. One such trail is said to lead directly to the Lake of Skeletons, Roopkund. It is not marked on ordinary charts. To find it, one must read between the lines of forgotten manuscripts, in travelogues written by monks who spoke more visions than geography, in the faded ink of scrolls where truth is hidden beneath layers of allegory. Yet across these texts, across generations, the same suggestion appears. There exists a hidden way to Roopkund, and those who walk it do not return the same. The story begins with merchants. Long ago, before empires rose and fell, caravans threaded to the mountains, carrying salt, cloth, and stories between kingdoms. The routes were perilous, but they kept the world connected. Among their records is mention of a detour, a side path that led not to a market or kingdom, but into the higher ridges. They called it the Path of Silence. No trade was ever carried upon it. No town stood along it, yet it was walked again and again. Some believed it was used by pilgrims seeking Nanda Devi. Others thought it was reserved for those on secret missions of kings. But there is one line, scrawled by a trader who passed through centuries ago, that chills the blood. The Path of Silence leads to a lake where the dead look upward from beneath the ice. None should walk it unless called. Later, scholars dismiss such words as exaggeration, yet the skeletons discovered at Roopkund prove that someone walked those paths. Many someones. Their bones are the testimony, and their belongings, the rings, the shoes, the spears, prove they came with intention, not by accident. Could this hidden path have been more than a route? Could it have been a trial? Some believe it was an ancient trade route lost to time, a passage that once connected distant lands through the Himalayas. The discovery of foreign bones lends weight to this idea. Merchants, explorers, strangers, they may have followed the path seeking fortune, only to be undone by the fury of the mountains. But the villagers tell a different story. To them, the path was never meant for trade. It was meant for testing. Old ballads, sung in broken melodies, speak of a chosen few who walked the forbidden way as a rite of passage. Not all returned, and those who did came back changed, silent, distant, as though carrying shadows in their eyes. They were not celebrated as heroes. They were feared, for the villagers whispered that the mountain had touched them, and a man touched by the mountain is never fully human again. Imagine such a path. Narrow trails along cliffs where a single misstep sends you into the abyss. Forests where the silence is so complete it hums in your bones. Snowfields that stretch endlessly, blinding your eyes and numbing your spirit. And finally, the lake itself, where skeletons lie like guardians, as if waiting to welcome you into their eternal company. To walk this path was to surrender to the mountain. To survive it was to be claimed by it. One story tells of a young prince who sought to prove himself, against the advice of his elders. He led a group along the forbidden path, declaring that the goddess would bless his courage. He never returned. Months later, when a wandering monk passed to the lake's edge, he saw among the skeletons a skull still crowned with fragments of a golden circlet. Another tale speaks of a secret order of monks who believed Roopkund was the threshold between worlds. They guided initiates along the forbidden path, testing not only their strength but their spirit. Those who faltered joined the skeletons beneath the ice. Those who returned bore scars not of body, but the mind. They whispered in strange tongues, dreamed of skies not of this world, and lived the rest of their days like men standing in two realities at once. Whether trade route or trial, one truth remains. The path to Roopkund was walked with purpose. None arrived there by chance. The skeletons at the lake did not wander blindly into their fate. They followed something, a call, a belief, a demand. It was during the modern study of Roopkund that these ancient maps were rediscovered. Scholars compared notes across centuries, piecing together fragments that pointed to a route long erased from official memory. They followed these hints and found trails winding higher into the ridges, paths too deliberate to be natural, yet too secret to appear in common charts. They realized that the path still exists, faint but real, hidden in the folds of the mountain. But when they shared this with a monk who lived near the sacred valley of Nanda Devi, he shook his head gravely. His words were few, but they carried the weight of centuries of fear. The path is not forgotten, he said. It is hidden, because it was never meant to be walked again. Those who seek the truth of Roopkund do not return unchanged. His warning was not metaphor. It was fact. The villagers spoke of outsiders who sought the forbidden way, explorers and adventurers who laughed at old stories. Some returned broken, speaking of whispers that drove them to the edge of madness. Others never returned at all. Their names joined the unspoken list of those claimed by the mountain. Could it be that the forbidden path was never about reaching the lake, but about what happened along the way? Those who walked to describe visions, strange lights flickering in the snow, the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. Some dreamed of ancestors walking beside them, only to vanish when touched. Others swore they heard chanting, not from companions, but from the wind itself. Each step along the path blurred the line between reality and illusion, between life and death. If the lake was the end, the path was the transformation. Perhaps this is why the belongings of the dead seem so intentional, so symbolic. They carried tokens to survive, not just a journey, but the trial. Rings, pendants, spears, not tools of survival, but of meaning. Offerings to forces waiting at the end of the path. And perhaps that is why their skeletons remain. Not because they were abandoned, but because their journey was unfinished. Today, the forbidden path remains hidden, known only to those who live in the shadow of Nanda Devi. They do not draw it on maps. They do not guide strangers along it. To them, it is not merely dangerous. It is sacrilege. The path was closed for a reason, and to open it is to invite the wrath that claimed hundreds before. Yet the temptation endures. For every warning, there is a seeker who refuses to listen. The skeletons, the artifacts, the mysteries. They pull at the human spirit like a magnet. What secrets lie at the end of the forbidden path? What truth waits in the silence of Roopkund? The mountain does not answer. It only waits, patient as stone, knowing that one day someone will walk the path again. And when they do, the lake will welcome them, as it has welcomed so many before. But the monk's warning lingers in the mind, heavier than the wind, sharper than the snow. Those who seek the truth of Roopkund do not return unchanged. The Lake of Skeletons has always been a riddle carved into the heart of the Himalayas. Bones lie preserved in ice, skulls fractured in strange ways, artifacts whispering of forgotten journeys. Legends speak of curses, gods, and forbidden paths. Yet for all its mystery, one explanation rose above the others. An explanation born not of folklore, but of science. It was a storm, not a storm of snow or rain, not a gentle shower from the heavens. No, what struck those who perished at Roopkund was something far more violent, something almost unimaginable. A storm of hail, stones of ice larger than a man's fist, raining from the sky with the force of weapons, each one capable of killing in a single blow. The evidence lay in the bones themselves. Skulls bore strange dents, round depressions deep and clean, as though struck by heavy objects falling from above. The rest of the body showed little damage. No shattered ribs, no broken legs, no signs of battle. Only the skulls, cracked and crushed by impact so brutal. They told of death arriving in an instant. For centuries, villagers had sung ballads of Nanda Devi's wrath, of pilgrims struck down by stones falling from the heavens. Now, science had stepped forward, and its explanation echoed the myth with chilling precision. Hailstones the size of cricket balls, falling with deadly speed at altitudes where there is no shelter. A sudden storm, in a place where no trees grow, no caves unopened, no roofs exist to shield a traveler. Imagine being caught there. The sky turns black, thunder roars, and the air fills with ice. 1,000 projectiles raining down. Panic erupts. Screams echo across the ridges. Men and women huddle together, but the blows continue mercilessly, striking heads, silencing voices, breaking the fragile line between life and death. Within minutes, the path is littered with bodies. The mountain drinks their blood, and the snow hardens over them. The storm ends as suddenly as it began. Silence falls again, broken only by the wind. But the dead remain, frozen in their last desperate postures, staring at the sky that betrayed them. It was perhaps the perfect explanation. Nature itself had been the executioner. Not gods, not curses, not forgotten armies, but weather. The wrath of the mountain was written in the clouds, not in the hands of deities. And yet, The explanation raised as many questions as it answered. If this was truly the cause, why had these people been traveling in such perilous conditions? Why had they ventured into a landscape where shelter was impossible? The belongings found with them, ornaments, jewelry, ceremonial objects, hinted not at merchants or soldiers, but at pilgrims. Were they walking in devotion, unaware that the skies above held their doom? Or had they been warned and chosen to walk anyway, believing faith would shield them? The villagers believed the second. To them, the hailstorm was no accident. It was not merely weather. It was the goddess's hand. Science might call them hailstones, but the faithful knew them as divine weapons. Stones of ice wielded by Nanda Devi to strike down those who had defied her sanctity. And the eerie part is this. Both explanations pointed to the same conclusion. The ballads were not fantasy. They were memory. The goddess's fury may have been written in the sky itself, in the merciless storm that turned the procession into a graveyard. For a time, it seemed the mystery had been solved. Researchers pointed to climate records, showing how rare but catastrophic hailstorms can form in the thin atmosphere of high altitudes. Villagers nodded knowingly, saying their ancestors had sung the truth all along. Myth and science, for once, walked hand in hand. But Roopkund is not so easily solved. The lake holds not one story, but many, and beneath its ice lies secrets that do not align so neatly with a single storm. When scientists continued their studies, they discovered something unsettling. Not all the skeletons bore the marks of hail. Not all skulls were fractured. Some were untouched, their bones showing no sign of such violence. And more troubling still, many of these remains came from times long after the supposed hailstorm. The hailstone theory, powerful as it was, could not explain everything, because deep in the ice, beneath layers untouched for centuries, newer skeletons emerged. Their bones carried no round dents, no evidence of being crushed by stones from the sky. They had died in other ways and at other times. The storm of death, it seemed, was not the only tragedy written into the lake. This revelation shattered the neat harmony between legend and science. If hailstones explained the first deaths, what explained the others? What brought people back to the same cursed lake across centuries, only for them to meet their end as well? Could lightning strike twice, or was there something else, something darker, that drew them here and claimed their lives? Some scientists propose multiple hailstorms spread across time, but the odds of so many groups being struck in the same place by the same rare phenomenon seemed impossible. Others suggested avalanches, starvation, or disease. But again, the evidence was inconsistent. Some bodies showed no cause of death at all, preserved as though they had simply lain down and surrendered to the mountain. The villagers shook their heads. To them, the answer was obvious. The storm had been real, yes, but it was only one chapter. The goddess did not stop punishing trespassers after one strike. Her wrath was eternal. Those who came later faced different ends. But the reason was the same. They had dared to walk where they should not, and in the silence of Roopkund, it is easy to believe them. Picture the scene again. A group of pilgrims, climbing high, chanting prayers into the cold air. They carry ornaments, food, offerings. They believe they walk under divine protection. But the clouds gather and the storm begins. Ice falls, merciless and unrelenting. In moments, the procession is destroyed. Now, centuries later, another group follows the same path. Perhaps they are drawn by devotion, perhaps by curiosity, perhaps by desperation. They reach the same lake, but no storm greets them. Instead, they encounter silence. They camp by the water, unaware that they lie among the bones of the cursed. And in that silence, something else moves. The wind howls, strange lights flicker, dreams disturb their sleep. They vanish into the same fate, though not by hail, not by weather, but by the hand of the mountain itself. This is the true terror of Roopkund. Not that it killed once, but that it kills again and again. The hailstorm may explain one tragedy, but it cannot explain the cycle. Why across centuries, across generations, do people continue to die here? Why does the mountain keep claiming them? Modern science still wrestles with the answers. The dents in the skulls remain undeniable proof of the storm. Yet the newer skeletons, untouched by hail, refuse to fit into the narrative. They mock the neatness of explanations, demanding we look deeper. And as researchers studied these remains, the mystery only grew. The DNA revealed that the later groups were not related to the earlier ones. They came from different times, different places, yet they chose the same path, the same fate, as though the mountain itself had whispered their names, calling them into its frozen embrace. It is here that myth regains its power. For the villagers, the explanation is simple. The goddess waits. The storm was her first warning, but not her last. Those who ignore her will always find their end in her domain. The lake is not a place of death by chance. It is a place of death by design. And so, the ballads remain hauntingly true. The goddess did strike with stones from the sky, but she also claimed those who came later by other means. Her wrath is not limited to one storm. It is eternal, as long as men continue to walk the forbidden path. Today, as the ice melts further, more skeletons emerge, some older, some newer, each one another piece of the puzzle. The hailstorm theory stands as one explanation, but it is not the final word. For the lake still whispers, and the dead still watch. And just when researchers thought they had solved the mystery with science, the newer skeletons proved them wrong. For they carry no hailstone marks, no storm scars, only silence. The storm of death was real, but it was not the whole story. The mountain has more secrets yet. At night, the Himalayas do not sleep. The winds howl through the valleys like restless spirits. The snow glows faintly under the silver light of the moon, and the silence deepens until even the sound of one's heartbeat feels like an intrusion. It is in this silence at the Lake of Skeletons that strange things begin to happen. For the villagers who live beneath the shadow of Nanda Devi, the lake has never been only a grave. It has always been a place of whispers, of signs, of things not meant for human eyes. And when darkness falls, they say the dead stir. For generations, shepherds and wanderers who dare to approach the lake after dusk have spoken of strange lights, faint at first, then flickering brighter, as though tiny flames dance above the ice. They shift, they drift, they float in circles before vanishing suddenly, leaving only the empty night behind. Some call them will-o'-the-wisps, tricks of the atmosphere, illusions born from the thin air. But the villagers do not call them illusions. They call them souls. To them, these lights are the restless spirits of the dead, wandering endlessly above their frozen bodies, seeking release from the lake that binds them. Each flicker is a cry, each glow a plea for liberation. And the villagers, who whisper prayers when they pass near Roopkund, insist that to ignore the lights is to mock the dead. Others see the lights differently. They believe they are not souls, but signals, not of spirits, but of the cosmos. Strange messages etched into the night, beacons from another world or another time. And indeed, some who studied the lake have found the lights appear in patterns, almost rhythmic, as though dancing to music only they can hear. Whatever they are, they cannot be dismissed, for too many have seen them. Too many have returned from the lake with stories etched into their eyes, stories they would rather forget. One shepherd told of waking in the night to find his entire flock standing still, their heads raised toward the lake. When he followed their gaze, he saw lights drifting across the frozen surface, moving slowly as though in procession. He swore he heard voices then. Faint chanting carried on the wind, though no human stood near. Terrified, he fled, leaving his animals behind. Another tale comes from a group of young men who climbed to Roopkund as a challenge, laughing at the warnings of the old. They camped by the lake, drinking, mocking the silence. But when night came, the laughter died. The lights rose over the water, brighter than stars, circling above the bones. The men swore they saw figures walking beneath the glow, shadowy forms drifting across the ice. By morning, one of them was gone, his footprints leading only to the center of the lake, where they vanished into nothingness. His companions never spoke of it again. In recent years, these stories attracted not only pilgrims but investigators. Paranormal researchers, carrying instruments of science, climbed the forbidden trails to see if the legends were real. They measured electromagnetic fields, tested the air, recorded sound, and what they found was unsettling. Their devices spiked near the lake. Energy surged inexplicably, far beyond what the natural environment could explain. Recorders picked up faint murmurs, voices too low to be conversation, too structured to be mere static. Some swore they captured chanting, rhythmic and haunting, echoing like the remnants of forgotten rituals. And the lights? They recorded them too. Not once, but many times, flickering across the ice with movements no instrument could rationalize. Skeptics dismissed these findings as atmospheric tricks, anomalies of altitude. But those who stood at Roopkund, who watched the lights with their own eyes, felt something else. The air grew heavy, their chests tightened, their thoughts blurred. It was as if the mountain itself pressed upon them, watching, waiting. The lights were not merely visual. They were felt. One investigator, a man who had traveled the world in search of unexplained phenomena, claimed Roopkund was different from anywhere else he had been. In haunted castles, he said, the air feels thick with memory. In deserts, the silence speaks of things long lost. But at Roopkund, the air itself vibrates, as though it carries a frequency beyond human hearing. It is not just haunted, he whispered to his companions. It is alive. On their final night at the lake, the investigators gathered near the shore, their equipment buzzing faintly. The lights rose again, dancing across the surface like a ghostly orchestra. Cameras clicked, recorders hummed, hearts pounded. And then something happened that none of them could explain. One of the investigators, a quiet man known for his skepticism, collapsed suddenly. His companions rushed to him, fearing altitude sickness, but his eyes were wide open, staring at the ice. His body trembled, his breath shallow. When they tried to move him, he clutched the ground, pointing toward the frozen lake. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Do you not see it? The city? The city beneath the ice." The others froze. They followed his gaze, but they saw only darkness, only the faint reflection of the stars. Yet the man insisted. He described towers rising from the depths, glowing faintly, their forms blurred as though submerged in water. He spoke of streets lined with shadows, of lights moving between structures, of an entire world trapped beneath the lake. His words grew frantic, his voice trembling between awe and terror. "They are not gone," he cried. "They are waiting." Moments later, his body went still. His companions carried him down the mountain, shaken beyond words. When he recovered, days later, he refused to speak of what he saw. But his words, uttered on that frozen night, have never been forgotten. The city beneath the ice. What did he see? Was it a vision born of exhaustion, of altitude, of the mind fraying in the grip of mystery? Or was it something real, a glimpse into another world hidden beneath Roopkund, revealed only to those who stand on the edge of life and death? The villagers, when told his words, nodded grimly. They had long whispered that the lake was not only a grave, but a doorway, that beneath its surface lies something older than the bones, older than the storm, older than memory itself. A place where the dead do not sleep, but linger, waiting to be seen. Science cannot answer this. It can measure the lights, record the murmurs, track the energy spikes. But it cannot explain the visions, the dreams, the sense of being watched. It cannot explain why so many, across centuries, have walked to this lake only to vanish into silence. The echoes of the otherworld are real, whether they are spirits, signals, or something else entirely. They linger over Roopkund like mist. They are the voices of forgotten, the flickers of the unseen, the tremors of truths too vast for human understanding. And when the investigator whispered a city beneath the ice, he did more than describe a vision. He opened a door. For if a city truly lies beneath the frozen waters of Roopkund, then the lake is not just a graveyard. It is a gateway to something that has been waiting for centuries. There are journeys that are remembered in history, pilgrimages that bind men and women in faith, where devotion carves paths across mountains and deserts. But then, there are journeys erased from memory, whispered only in fragments, where those who walked the path vanished, and their names were never spoken again. Roopkund, the Lake of Skeletons, lies at the heart of one such story. For in ancient texts, faintly preserved on fragile manuscripts, there is mention of forbidden pilgrimage, one that led not to shrines of light, but to the lake of judgment. The texts are cryptic. They do not describe the lake in detail, only hint at its presence high in the mountains where the goddess weighs the soul and the unworthy are broken. To some scholars, these words were nothing more than allegory, but to those who stood by Roopkund, gazing upon hundreds of bones frozen in their last moments, the words felt too close to truth. Could Roopkund once have been a spiritual testing ground where pilgrims walked to face their destiny? Or was it something darker still, a place of ritual, a burial site for a cult whose secrets were never meant to be uncovered? The idea of the lake as a pilgrimage site is not difficult to imagine. In many traditions, mountains are sacred, places where the veil between the human and the divine grows thin. To climb into such heights is to leave behind the world of men and step into the domain of gods. Roopkund lies beneath the sacred peak of Nanda Devi, a mountain revered for centuries. To journey there may have been seen as an act of devotion, a final test of purity and strength. But the skeletons tell a crueler story. For those who reached the lake did not return to sing of blessings. They remained there, their bodies scattered across the ice, their voices silenced forever. The villagers call the lake cursed, but some believe it was never a curse. It was a covenant, a place where men offered themselves willingly, not knowing if they would return. For what is a pilgrimage if not a walk into uncertainty, a gamble with the divine? And what is Roopkund if not the ultimate gamble, where faith was tested not by prayer, but by death? Yet, there are darker whispers. Ancient songs speak not only of pilgrims, but of those who sought power in the shadow of the goddess. The phrase has led some to believe that Roopkund was not merely a place of judgment, but also of ritual, that cults, hidden from the eyes of the world, walked the forbidden path carrying offerings not for blessings but for bargains. The belongings found among the skeletons add to this unease. Pendants carved with symbols no one recognizes. Spears that seem ceremonial rather than practical. Rings and ornaments that feel less like personal possessions and more like tokens prepared for sacrifice. Were these the tools of pilgrims seeking purity, or the instruments of a cult conducting rituals in the cold shadow of the mountain? The villagers believe in the first. Scholars argue for the second. But both agree on one thing. Those who came to Roopkund came with purpose. And purpose, when bound to the sacred, can be more terrifying than chance. Imagine the scene. A procession of pilgrims, their torches flickering against the snow, climbing higher into the thin air. They sing songs of devotion, their voices carried by the wind. At their head, priests or leaders, their faces solemn, their steps deliberate. They reach the lake at dusk, its frozen surface glimmering like a mirror of the heavens. Their rituals are performed, chants, offerings, perhaps even sacrifices. But something goes wrong. Perhaps the goddess is displeased. Perhaps the ritual is flawed. Perhaps the purpose was never devotion at all, but arrogance. The skies answer with fury. The earth trembles, and death claims them all. Their bodies remain as testimony, their bones scattered as warning. It is here that the idea of the lake of judgment grows haunting. For if Roopkund was a place of divine weighing, then every skeleton is a verdict. Each skull cracked by hail, each body preserved in ice, is a declaration, unworthy. What faith would dare to create such a place, where the ultimate offering was not prayer, but life itself? As time passed, the memory of this pilgrimage faded. The cults, if they existed, vanished into shadow. Only the ballads remained, softened into legend, reshaped into songs of wrathful gods. Yet beneath those songs lies a truth sharper than the mountain winds, that Roopkund was never a place one stumbled upon. It was a destination, and perhaps it still is. When researchers began scanning beneath the ice, using ground-penetrating instruments to study the lake bed, they expected only mud, rocks, and bones. What they found was something else entirely. The scans revealed shapes, patterns too regular to be natural, too deliberate to be dismissed. Rectangles, lines, formations resembling walls. The first thought was simple. Perhaps they were natural rock formations, fractured in strange ways by the glacier. But as the scans grew clearer, doubt turned to unease, for the shapes resembled structures, stone structures, as though beneath centuries of ice lay the remnants of something built by human hands. The implications were staggering. If true, it meant Roopkund was not only a burial ground, not only a site of tragedy, but a place where something once stood, a shrine, a temple, an altar, perhaps even the very heart of the forbidden pilgrimage. The villagers, when told of this discovery, were not surprised. They had long whispered that beneath the lake lay something older than the skeletons. They called it the foundation of judgment. They believed that long before pilgrims carried offerings, long before the storm of hail, long before even their own ancestors, men had built a place at Roopkund, a place where gods were called and shadows answered. For the scholars, the scans raised more questions than answers. Were these truly man-made structures? If so, who built them and why? Could they belong to forgotten civilization, erased from history, leaving only these stones as proof? Or were they part of the cult's rituals, an altar deliberately drowned in ice? The possibility of an ancient temple buried beneath Roopkund changes everything. It transforms the lake from a place of tragedy into a place of intention. The skeletons are no longer only victims of chance or weather. They are participants in something larger, something hidden. But what? Were they pilgrims walking willingly into judgment? Their deaths the price of faith? Were they cultists performing rituals too dangerous for the world to remember? Or were they simply caught in the gravity of a place that has always been more than it seems? A place where the earth itself holds secrets too vast for human comprehension? The scans cannot yet answer these questions. The stones remain locked in ice, unreachable, untouchable. But their presence lingers in the mind, unsettling, undeniable. And so, the Lake of Skeletons grows deeper in mystery. It is no longer only a graveyard. It may be a ruin, a temple, a shrine drowned in frost. And as the scans revealed their strange shapes, one scholar whispered words that chilled his companions. If these are structures, he said, then the lake itself was never the end. It was a beginning. Beneath centuries of silence, Roopkund may still hold its oldest secret, waiting patiently in the dark. High in the Himalayan silence, where the peaks scrape the sky and the wind howl like ancient voices, there is a lake that refuses to be forgotten. Roopkund, the Lake of Skeletons. A place where death is not hidden in graves or consumed by fire, but laid bare upon the earth, preserved in ice, as though the mountain itself chose to remember. Today, centuries after the first shepherd stumbled upon its frozen secrets, the skeletons remain, silent, unburned, unburied. Hundreds of hollow eyes stare forever upward toward the heavens. They are not nameless dust. They are watchers, frozen mid-gesture, mid-step, mid-prayer, as if still caught in the moment of their ending. And they are watching still. Scientists have measured, studied, debated. Priests have warned, whispered, sung. Adventurers continue to climb, to see for themselves a graveyard in the sky. Yet for all the stories told, for all the theories written, one truth endures. Every bone speaks, but the full story slips away like mist. The modern world has tried to tame the mystery of Roopkund with the tools of reason. DNA tests reveal origins from distant lands. Carbon dating places deaths centuries apart. Fractures on skulls suggest hail. Storms of ice that fell like iron from the heavens. Yet none of these explanations capture the whole truth. The lake remains defiant, mocking human curiosity. For every answer offered, new questions emerge. Why here? Why so many? Why across time? Again and again, the priests give their answer in simple words. It is judgment. The goddess Nanda Devi has marked this place as sacred, and all who defy her meet their end. To the faithful, the skeletons are not mysteries to be solved, but warnings to be heeded. They are eternal witnesses, their presence proof of divine wrath. Adventurers, however, see it differently. To them, Roopkund is a challenge. The mountain dares them, and they accept. They climb the forbidden paths, camp by the frozen shore, and peer into the depths where skulls glimmer faintly in the ice. Some leave shaken, others enthralled, but all leave with the same thought. This is no ordinary lake. Even in the modern age, the lake has not lost its voice. Those who sleep by its waters speak of strange dreams, of chants, of lights, of figures rising from the ice. Instruments detect unexplained energy surges, voices hidden in static, signals no machine can fully explain. Roopkund resists being silenced. It speaks in whispers and flickers of light, in the hollow sockets of its eternal watchers. And still, the skeletons remain. They have outlasted empires. They have endured the rise and fall of kingdoms. They have seen men discover fire, iron, machines in flight. Yet they lie unmoved, staring upward, their story unfinished. Who were they? The theories remain as varied as the bones themselves. Pilgrims, struck down in devotion. Soldiers, lost to storms. Merchants, wandering into forbidden lands. Foreigners, drawn from across seas by whispers of power. Cultists, seeking to open doors never meant to be touched. Perhaps they were all of these. Perhaps Roopkund is not one story, but many, layered upon each other like the snow itself. Each death a new verse in the same haunting song. And what are their belongings? The rings, the pendants, the shoes that seem too modern, the symbols carved in bone that resemble constellations no longer visible in the night sky. Were these tokens of love, of faith, of sacrifice? Or were they keys, fragments of knowledge left deliberately, hoping one day it'd be discovered? The priests say the belongings mean nothing. They are trinkets of the unworthy, frozen as reminders of arrogance. The scientists say they are artifacts, precious glimpses into the lives of those who died. But the villagers whisper something else, that the objects were not left by accident, but by choice, that they were offerings, tokens left at the lake not for men, but for the mountain itself. And so, the lake becomes more than a graveyard. It becomes an altar where death is not an accident, but ritual, where those who walk the forbidden path do so knowing they may never return, where the mountain, cold and unyielding, receives their bodies as offerings, keeping them as eternal witnesses. The watchers remain. Each skull tells the same story. A life ended suddenly, a journey unfinished, a destiny claimed by the ice. And yet, together, they tell a larger story of a place where the boundary between the human and the divine is blurred, where the living and the dead walk side by side, where time itself folds into silence. For Roopkund is not just a lake. It is a mirror of human ambition, devotion, arrogance, and fear. It reflects not only the sky above, but the shadows within us all. Those who come here do not only find skeletons, they find themselves reflected in the hollow sockets of the eternal watchers. And the lake waits still. Each year, as the ice melts, new bones emerge, new skulls rise from the depths. Each one another voice, another fragment of the mountain's unfinished tale. Just when it seems the story is complete, Roopkund reminds us it is not done speaking. Imagine standing there today. The wind cuts like knives, the air thin, each breath an effort. The water lies still, frozen, shimmering beneath the pale light. Beneath its surface, skulls gleam faintly as though lit from within. You feel their eyes on you, empty yet endless, as if they know secrets you cannot bear to learn. The scientists argue, the priests warn, the adventurers climb. Yet none hold the final truth. Only the mountain does. And the mountain does not give it freely. It gives only glimpses, bones, lights, whispers, symbols carved in forgotten languages, structures buried beneath the ice. Each revelation is a thread, but the tapestry remains hidden, and perhaps it always will. For the lake is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be remembered. It is not a riddle to answer, but a voice to hear. A voice that has spoken for centuries and will speak for centuries more, as long as the watchers remain. As the day fades into twilight, the shadows lengthen across the ice. The skeletons stare upward, their sockets glowing faintly in the dying light. They do not speak. They do not move, yet their presence fills the air like thunder waiting to break. And then, as the temperature falls and the surface cracks with the sound of splitting glass, a new fissure forms in the ice. Slowly, silently, it spreads across the lake. Beneath it, something stirs. The light catches, and there it is, the faint outline of another skull rising from the dark. Another watcher, another voice, another reminder that the mountain is not done. The lake of skeletons continues to speak, and the eternal watchers remain, guarding their secrets, staring at the heavens, waiting for the day when their full story will finally be told. Until then, Roopkund waits, silent, watching, eternal. The Lake of Skeletons still lies silent in the heart of the Himalayas. Its bones do not whisper their full truth. Its waters do not give away their final secret. Perhaps they never will. Perhaps they were never meant to. Roopkund remains a question carved into ice, a mirror where myth and science meet, where the living can only guess at the shadows of the dead. And as the mountain continues to reveal new skulls, new belongings, new echoes from the past, one thing is certain. The story is not finished. It lingers like the cold wind over the ridges. It calls like the chant carried through the night. And it reminds us that some mysteries are not solved, only remembered. If you felt the weight of this tale, if the silence of the eternal watcher stays with you, if the thought of forgotten paths, forbidden pilgrimages, and voices from beneath the ice stirs something in your soul, then join us. Walk further into the unknown. There are more lost cities, more cursed places, more haunted landscapes where the earth itself tells stories older than memory. Like this video, share it with those who hunger for mysteries, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. What do you believe lies beneath the lake? And if you wish to continue this journey into the hidden, the forgotten, and the forbidden, then subscribe to this channel. For the next story waits, just beyond the mist.